I love sport. I love watching sport. I love playing it, although not as much now as I used to, I'm afraid. But sport is great. I love team sports. I love football. I love rugby. And in those games, you generally get two sorts of players. You get those who are all about the team winning. They play for the badge. They play for the shirt. They're not particularly in it for the personal glory. They just want their team to win. You get other sorts of players, though. Sometimes they're really good, but they're playing for themselves. They want all the glory. They're not really bothered about the team winning per se. They want to win. Now, very often, as a fan, you don't really care whether they're playing for the shirt or whether they're playing for themselves, just so long as they're playing well and your team wins. Well, there's something of that situation going on in the verses we'll look at today in Philippians. We're going to look at chapter 1 and verses 16 through to 18. I'll just read verses 16 and 17 first of all, though. Here's what the Apostle Paul says. To be sure, some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. These, so that's the ones who preach it out of goodwill, preach out of love, knowing that I am appointed for the defence of the gospel. The others proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, thinking that they will cause me trouble in my imprisonment. You can see what's happening here, can't you? Paul's in prison. He's aware that other people who are not imprisoned like himself, but who proclaim Christ, are out doing exactly that. Some of them are very much doing it for the team. They're with Paul, they love Paul, they know that Paul's on the same side of them, they're all in it together, they just want the good news of Christ to get out there. There are others, though, who seem to be trying to use the preaching of Christianity, the preaching of Christ, to build themselves a platform and a reputation. They've seen people like Paul become well known, admired in certain quarters, especially amongst those who become Christians themselves, and think, well, I want a bit of that. I want to be as popular as he is with those who follow Christ. So out of selfish ambition, they preach Christ too. Now, you might think Paul's response to that is going to be one of really having a go at those heart motives of those who preach Christ out of selfish ambition, and him saying we could do without them, we don't want them, in fact they're a danger, get rid of them. Amazingly, that's not how he responds. Look at our last verse of the three that we're reading this morning. It's verse 18. What does it matter? Only that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is proclaimed. And in this I rejoice. It's a bit like that fan of the football team or the rugby team who just wants their team to win. Actually, at the end of the day, not counting as the most important thing being whether the player is playing for the shirt, but whether they're good enough to help the team to win, even if they're in it for their own glory. That's the attitude Paul is actually taking here when it comes to the proclamation of the gospel. He's saying, look, I know that there are some people who do it out of selfish ambition. They're not really that bothered about whether Christ gets the glory, the praise, the worship, and whether people are coming to Christ and getting to know Christ. All they're bothered about is building their own platform. I know that, he says. But even though their motives are wrong, because of them, people are hearing the gospel. And that is what is most important. Their heart motives aren't unimportant, but what is most important is that others are hearing about Jesus. Isn't that incredible? It shows you something of Paul's heart and what he thought mattered most. That people hear about Jesus Christ and their need to trust in him for the forgiveness of their sins. Paul is not here saying, I don't care if people preach a false gospel about Christ as long as they hear about Christ, because a false gospel is one that misrepresents Christ. No, these were people with wrong motives but preaching a true gospel. And Paul says, well, I can rejoice at least in the fact that because of them, people are hearing the true gospel. That means we should rejoice whenever somebody preaches the gospel, proclaims the gospel, lives out the gospel, points people to the true Jesus of the Bible, even if those people rub us up the wrong way, don't do things the way we would do them, we're perhaps not even sure of their motives and think they're in it for their own glory, if they preach Christ, we can rejoice in that. So let's.